I know you're not very far. How we should hurry, 'cause I'm inclined to worry. These arms of mine are open, hoping you'll appear. Where are you, dear?
U-boats are not having it all their own way, as these pictures prove. A further consignment of undersea rats caught in the act of attempting to foul the lifeline of our island fortress. We also show the contents of another tin. Fritz, with a number of his companions in crime, makes the acquaintance of a British sergeant and doesn't appear to like it. None says, "Good old sergeant." They're on their way to a place of safekeeping for the duration.
In the days and months that followed the Allied invasions in June 1944, many thousands of German prisoners were brought to Britain. Of the 1,500 establishments which housed them, one island farm camp was situated outside a small South Wales market town called Bridgend.
You can imagine the excitement of the staff at Bridgend, and everybody's expecting to see the big, tall, blonde, arrogant man. But instead of that, he was a short, short and rather depressed, tired, hungry, and dirty.
I remember when the prisoners walked in here, 1943, something like that, off the railway station, off the train, on the square, formed up in eighths. We used to form in threes, in the army. And by God, they were a formidable lot, big, well-dressed, messing about it on.
I listened to 2 or 3 Prussians I considered to be well monocled, and they were speaking perfect English. And the thing was that amused me to see this monocled officer looking up at an advert on the Bridgend railway station, advertising the Swansea Empire, a quiet weekend. And, they had a quiet weekend. Now, on the way down, opposite Stockwood Williams, the Stockwood Williams solicitor's shop there, offices, and they were booed, you see, and 2 women stepped off the pavement, and this monocled officer, he was walking behind me, you see, they spat square in his face,
People around, I think they were rather frightened about it. They're just big fellows and all that, Anyhow, to see him go on a station hill like that, it was really a picture, frightening.
We marched up through Murthamar Road and past my house, really, my house where I lived. And of course, all the way up, they were singing, "We are marching to England." I thought, that's it, you were in Wales, boy.
The first time these men stepped from a train at Bridgend Station was in 1944. Some months later, they broke out of Island Farm Camp in what was the greatest escape ever attempted by German prisoners of war.
Das war abgeteilt. Und das war hier abgeteilt.
Hier lebten die englischen Lanzer.
Moment mal, wo war denn das?
Hier muss da auch noch eine Baracke gewesen sein.
Und welches war jetzt der Rollcall-Platz? Der muss da sein. Die Engländer kamen hier rein, meines Wissens, über diese Geschichte. Dann war das auch nicht eine Reihe Baracken da. Und da sind wir ausgerissen. Da ging es rein. Und da rechts nicht die Baracke. Hier, nicht hier. Hier rein, da rein. Okay. Und rechts nicht die Baracke. Hier, natürlich. Guck mal, hier ist doch das Haus. Nix, gar nichts. Komm, pass auf.
Und hier war die andere?
Nein, da war die erste. Da war die erste. Und wir haben hier gewohnt. Hier.
Unseres Lagers.
Ja, stimmt. Hier waren so Verwaltungsgebäude.
Richtig.
At one of the camps somewhere in Britain, ex-German sailors saved from sunken U-boats and ex-German airmen are learning to start life afresh in more peaceful jobs. They're not forced to wear any prison uniform, but to avoid escape they have patches of contrasting material sewn into their trousers and onto the backs of their jacket.
Aha, ganz gut. Ja. Da haben Steffi und der Elend aus Gütersloh. Und oben drüber hat der Oswald Prio aus Bielefeld gewohnt. Und hier haben wir beide geschlafen. Das war unser Doppelbett. Du hast unten geschlafen, ich habe oben geschlafen.
Ja, ja, genau.
In der Mitte war hier der Tisch. Das war
Aber
unser,
hat man nicht hier so eine kleine, so ein Ding hier, wo wir drauf geröstet haben? Oder wo
nee, das haben wir nicht.
Nee, das war hier. Das ist eure Wäscheleine da oben.
Ja.
War das überhaupt wieder Heizung hier?
Hier kann mich aber erinnern, was wir
Hier liegt, ja, du hast recht, hier liegt das Tor links für die Heizung.
Then it's most, that's here very interesting, describing the wall. Müßiggang ist allerletzter Anfang. That means in English, to do nothing is a bad thing, you know. Yeah. That's what I think.
Charlie, did you live here in this room?
No. We're just right.
And in place of the iron discipline and barked orders, they find an easy comradeship, even with their guards. And if you could read deep down into his heart, maybe you'd find him saying, well, it isn't so bad to get away from it after all.
Unser Appartement war das.
So, gehen wir in dein Zimmer mal rein hier. Wo ist denn das?
Mein Gott, Walter. Oh je. Mein Gott. Nee. Das war das hier? Guck mal da.
Ja, hier ist es.
Guck mal, hier ist es.
Ja.
Das sind die nice girls.
Ja, das ist.
Oh, die waren doch auch noch sehr
Hier die restlichen.
Hier sind die. Ja, die haben die nachgemalt. Das ist ja nichts mehr.
Ja, zur Ablenkung. Wo sind wir drauf?
Ja, natürlich.
Wie klein das Los habe ich gar nicht in Erinnerung.
Ich meine, da sind wir zurückgekommen.
Kommst du mit dem dicken Bauch? Mach mal auf. Ja.
Das ist aber ein dicken Bauch hier.
All work and no play makes even Fritz a dull boy. So it's the German U-boat service versus the German Air Force at Fußball.
The 1,600 prisoners in Island Farm shared its facilities with some 300 guards. As was usual in British prisoner of war camps, these were drawn from a variety of regiments and were often men who, through old age or ill health, were prevented from enjoying more active service. Bill Gibbons and Fred Alsop were guards at Island Farm.
Where we used to mount guard. Guard mounting took place here, if you remember.
Yes, okay.
And to our rear was the guard hut. And immediately over to the left was the British Guards billets. And along inside there was the recreation area where the Germans used to play volleyball and football and various activities.
In Bridgend fing für uns eigentlich
normale POW
ein normales Gefangenenleben.
In Bridgend, normal prison camp life began for us. One has to look at it from a positive side. We got a bed, we got regular meals, and we received our laundry.
Mit dem man nicht anhört. Es war für jeden eine gewisse Nervenbelastung.
It was for everyone a certain strain on the nerves. We had come out of the fighting line. Our units were more or less wiped out. In our case, for example, barely one battalion was left out of a division. I believe 400 men were captured.
Kamen 400 Mann in Gefangenschaft.
Ja, wir waren ja alle in einem Stress rausgerissen aus dieser Welt, die uns ständig umgab. Und plötzlich in die
We were all in a state of stress, torn out of the world that had surrounded us and confronted with the situation of the captive.
Was auch bei uns ein bisschen noch Norm war, wegfiel.
Bridgend was the first place where we came to ourselves again. And then we at once got something going, when we got back together again.
When we got our strength back.
Das muss ich ja bei dir sagen, bei euch wenn ihr am 18. Dezember angekommen seid. Von meinem Standpunkt aus, denn ich war ja, ihr wisst ja, von der Waffen-SS. Ich wusste ja auch nicht, was mit uns...
From my point of view, because as you know, I was in the armed SS, I did not know what they thought of us, what they would do with us, or what they might do to us. The position was that in general, in all camps, we were recognized as officers in our ranks, without any doubt. I was a first lieutenant. We also had this payment of camp money, and I regard that as a most positive matter from our standpoint. We were treated like any other officer.
Wirklich behandelt wurden, wie jeder andere Offizier auch.
But no one started to think about how those at home would get news of us, that we were still alive, since one could only assume we had been posted missing.
Als vermisst abgemeldet wurden und dass sie insofern benachrichtigt wurden.
That's what happened in my case. My relatives heard that I was missing.
Yes, my wife got a missing notification.
Dass ich dann später die Karte habe. Damals wussten wir es nicht, aber wir konnten dann...
But then we were finally allowed to write, and the people at home knew that we were alive. I remember it was in December that we had the cards to send.
Yes, and what was printed on the card? A member of the defeated German army is looking for his relations.
I was around about 6 months captured. And when you live 6 months only with man, and you see ever the same, and you hear ever the same, and ever the same problems, and when new prisoners came in, and they told you the story of your prisonership, and the last verse was ever, and at last it was finished. You can't hear it anymore, and I thought, what shall I do? I must have some activities. And I heard that this is a way, and I worked on the tunnel, and I could escape on this way.
Ja, in diesem Zusammenhang haben wir schon, gerade wir...
Yes, in this connection, those who had the intention of escaping concentrated firmly on learning English. When the time came, I had trouble convincing the policeman that I was who I said I was, but I suppose it helped.
Dass ich ein Miner bin.
Ich hatte es ja schon mal erzählt, dass ich in Comrie begonnen hatte, Geld
In Comrie camp, I had begun to change money, namely French francs into English pounds. With these pounds, I bought an English uniform from an Irish soldier.
Eine englische Uniform gekauft. Als wir dann später in Bridgend waren, wollten wir diese Geld...
When we got to Bridgend, I wanted to continue these money transactions, and I started dealings with a Scotsman. We explored the ground, very carefully to start with, to make sure he would not swindle us.
Der auch wohl uns nicht reinlegen würde.
You remember these toys that the Germans used to make, Bill? And we used to give them cigarettes for these. We would take them down to Bridgend, and I think we used to sell them for about 30 bob. Get a nice beer money out of them, didn't we? Remember? The thing is that they got a bit wise to the cigarettes, though, didn't they? You know, we used to give them woodbines and park drives. You know, they'd put their hand up 10, 20 or 30 for whatever they wanted. Yeah. But as I say, they got wise to use woodbines and park drives, and they began to say, no small cigarettes, we want big ones. Yeah.
I don't know whether one of you is aware who first hit on the idea of building a tunnel. I think it is difficult to establish this because we were not a firm association. As far as I know, there were about 200 people who intended to break out, but they were not all acquainted with one another. They were mainly small groups of between 2 and 4 men. Gradually, these groups did establish contact and learnt that the others wished to escape. I came into it when the tunnel was half ready. This did not become clear to me until the night of the escape, when I was not allowed out of the tunnel until fairly late. You had been cooperating from the very start.
Ihr hattet ja schon von Anfang an mitgearbeitet.
Wir waren also doch schon ziemlich...
Yes, we were in it more or less from the beginning. We did not come to the camp until December, and I'm sure no start had been made at that time. From the fact that we went out as the 4th group, I think we must have been in it from almost the start.
Als wir also als 4. Gruppe herausgehen, muss ich annehmen, dass wir also von Anfang an dabei waren.
That's our billet over there, but where we used to sleep, you remember?
Oh, we used to have an escape route of our own, with a hole in the edge, so that we could get through this hole and go down to Bridgend for a pint.
Yes, it's true.
I remember one occasion we tried this thing off, me and my mate. My mate got through the edge. The guards grabbed him and took him back into the guard room. I was a little bit fortunate. I shot through the window and got into my bed, covered myself over with a blanket, and there I stopped until lunchtime, it was. Lunchtime, that's right, lunchtime.
When we had dug the first few meters, stones and rocks began to fall down, so we had to prop up the tunnel, and somebody was given the job of obtaining wood for this purpose.
Dann bekam also jemand den Auftrag, dafür Holz zu besorgen.
Yes, that's right, and I helped with this. We stole benches from the mess hall and sawed them up to make pit props with.
Bänke gestohlen und haben die dann zersägt und als Stützmaterial verwendet.
Ich erinnere mich nur daran.
I can remember that you stole this wood, but suddenly the supply of wood stopped, and we didn't know where to get any more. Then somebody had the marvelous idea of cutting down the beds which were in the huts.
Die Betten abzuschneiden, die in den Baracken standen.
In order that the beds would now not be of different heights, we cut them all down.
Und dann hatten wir also wieder genügend Holz für
I remember we had a stack of wood like this lying there and supported the tunnel with it.
Stapel von Holzbrettern da liegen, um den Gang abzustützen.
Man musste in der ersten Phase zu zweit die Arbeit ausführen.
In the first phase, the work had to be done by 2 people, but later, because of the increasing length of the tunnel, by 3. We were all naked when we worked and kept ourselves fit with cold showers.
Wir hatten uns fit gehalten durch ständigen...
I would like to add, the feeling of having to go into the tunnel, of being down there, always greatly worried me. Despite all the activity, despite the intention to escape, it was always a real nightmare working in the tunnel.
War das eine echte Beklemmung, in diesem Gang zu arbeiten.
At this time, the air was bad. You could work only 2-3 minutes, and you couldn't work anymore. And therefore, a couple of men built a kind of air condition, let's say. And it was very primitive. We built milk tins to a tube and a ventilator. But you couldn't work longer than 10 minutes.
If you remember, that's where the naffy used to be there. You could go in when you were off duty and have a cup of tea and a rock cake, game of darts, or sing songs we used to have, you know. Yeah. And of course, on 1 or 2 occasions, when I was on guard on this point, I used to stand up again in the generating room there. Yeah. And over there, of course, was the German bakehouse.
Yeah.
And, you know, I used to shout over to the Jerry's, Brot, Exton, and they would flick me a nice hot cob over. And I used to stand up again this generating wall here and have a nice cup of tea and a cup, you know.
Yeah. The condition, I think, have been, for my person, awfully hard, because the working was hard, the air condition was bad, and sometimes let me say honestly, sometimes I was afraid. It was a hard work, and I was afraid because it was dangerous, you know. And now, by now I'm 54 years, by now I wouldn't do it. But it was 21 years I have done it.
The evening before we get out, we were all in the camp nervous. We worked 2 months. Hard work, and now that moment we could get out. All the cameras came at 8 o'clock after dinner and said, say goodbye and write a letter to my wife and make a telephone to my mother and so on. All the comrades thought that we came really to Germany.
Jetzt kam der große Tag. Der Gang war fertig. Wir hatten unsere Vorbereitungen getroffen.
Then the great day came. The tunnel was ready. We made our preparations. We went out as the 4th group. Lookout men had been posted on the right and left, and whenever the light went out in the tunnel, it meant that the guards were nearby.
On the night of the escape, Bill, I was standing more or less where I'm standing now. And the hut across there was where I was listening to all this singing. And one of the Germans opened the window and looked out, and I shouted, "Prima music!" And he shouted, "Ja, ja," and went back and shut the window, and this celebration went on for quite a while, more or less until you came on duty.
When we got out of the tunnel, we had to crawl across a ploughed field. As we were a group of 4, we arranged to meet by a tree on the other side of the field.
When I came on duty from 12 till 2, I'd been on duty about 3/4 of an hour to an hour, I should imagine. And I was walking along my beat, and halfway across the beat now, something seemed to tell me to look back. And I turned round, and I could see my mate Johnny standing by the telephone box on the light. So I went up to him and asked him, I said, are you ill, Johnny? He said, no, I'm not ill. He said, but I'll tell you this, Bill. He said, when I went up to my beat last, I saw faces looking through the window, and I had knock-ins. So with this now, I gets down to the phone, phones the guard commander, and within 10 minutes to a quarter of an hour, he came up with 2 lance corporals.
I was warned by the light. The light got out. The guard were coming, and they lay behind the wall.
He asked what the trouble were. I told him what the trouble were.
The guard made his report, and the officer said okay, and then they went on. And then I went on too.
And the 2 lance corporals went up to the end of Johnny's beat and stayed there till the rest of our time.
I belonged to the last group, and behind me there was my friend Scheinberg, and behind him there was another man. I had never seen him before. He doesn't belong to any group.
Wir beiden waren dann die Letzten.
We were the last ones, and as everyone knows, the last ones are always bitten by the dogs.
Wir lagen auf dem Acker.
We were lying in the plowed field, and this man Tunsman joined us there. He hadn't darkened his white kit back, and what's more, he had glasses in it which rattled. The searchlight swept across the field and spotted his white kit back. The guards shouted at him and shot. It hit him, and we lay there not knowing what to do.
Wir lagen dort und wussten dann nicht mehr, was wir machen sollten.
On the march, we heard the shoot and the dogs. And then we must hurry on.
I just suppose I'd been in bed about an hour when the whistles and the commotion started.
Und dann wussten wir nicht, was wir
Then we stood up and put our hands up. And the English soldiers came and were very angry. They said, you will fight and die for the Führer, and master race, and so on.
And so on.
This was, I think, the finish of our escape.
It was early in the morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the inspector, my inspector from the police station rang up, and he said, there's something wrong at the camp. The Colonel Darling's been on the line, but he hasn't said anything. There's something wrong here. He said, you better come up.
Meine Absicht war ja, auf einen amerikanischen Truck zu springen.
My intention had been to jump on an American truck, but unfortunately none came along. There was a rather amusing incident which occurred. We were waiting by a corner, hoping for a truck to stop at a traffic light, when the man in whose garden we were waiting returned home at about 11:30. He was slightly drunk, and he urinated in the corner of the garden, almost under the head of my friend Hassler. He then made a very human sound, a loud noise, and I was able to do only one thing, which was to turn my head away.
I said to Darling, are you certain as to what the extent of the escape is? Are you got the thing in control? Can you account for your men? Yes, he said. I've had a roll call. And what sort of a roll call? He said, I've had them calling out their names. And he said, every man has answered that I've got his record here in the camp.
Also es kam kein Truck, es kam nichts. Wir sind dann weiter an der Bahnlinie.
Well, no truck came. There was nothing. We moved on towards the railway line. There we crept into a goods wagon. The train started, but unfortunately it moved very slowly. Then stopped in a small marshalling yard. I looked out. What were we to do now? We proceeded on foot, but we had to go through this small town. We turned into this narrow street in front of the station, and suddenly we were confronted by a bobby who came around the corner on his bicycle. That is why we had not heard him. Anyway, he appeared before us and said, hands up, you are prisoners of war.
You are Mr. Bowerstock?
I am the
I'm
gentleman,
so
sir.
pleased to see you. Maybe you remind this day you caught me again. You remember you came round the corner with your bicycle, and suddenly you stood there and, come on, you said, you are prisoners of war. No, I told you, I'm poor miner. I tried to go out for my 8 children, but you didn't believe me.
No.
And we thought, and this time, that every policeman got a gun. No, I didn't have a... And if I had known this time, I gave a little push, took your bicycle, yes, and went off. My friend Hans Hetzler, come on, jump up on the bicycle.
He's been all right, too.
Really?
The sergeant said, Baverstock of Lanharan has telephoned to say that he thinks he's got 2 German prisoners. So I said to Darley, these chaps got out at 10 o'clock. Well, he said all the answer he could give me was, well, they all answered their names. Well, of course they would. You see, everybody was answering for everybody else. So that was it. And then the hunt was on.
After we left the camp, I got with one of my friends to Bridgend town, where we know that there was standing a car.
Wir hatten also, das muss dazu gesagt werden.
I should point out that we had civilian clothes over our uniforms. We exchanged them for cigarettes with some German building workers we met.
Hatten wir uns die gegen Zigaretten ausgetauscht.
Ich kann mich erinnern, in der linken Tasche dieses große Bündel von nachgemacht.
I remember that I had a huge bunch of forged keys. I found the car, got the engine started with one of the keys, but the car wouldn't move. Why this was, I don't know. But anyway, the battery went flat. Then 3 English soldiers came along and helped to push the car, and it started.
Wachsoldaten, englische...
I should mention that they were slightly tipsy.
Die waren allerdings leicht angetrunken, muss ich dabei sagen.
Und ich bin mit dem Steffi Ehlert dann zu einem Bauernhof, den wir vorher ausgemacht hatten.
While you were starting the car, I went with Oswald to a farm where there was a lorry, and we tried to siphon petrol from it into a coffee bottle. We did not do very well, because throughout England there was not much fuel about.
Die hatten also unter dem im englischen
We went back to wait for you, and were glad to see the little car chugging along.
kommt dann ein Auto
It had strips of paper over the headlamps. They too had the blackout in England.
Auch Verdunklung in England. Und dann
We saw you, Hans, and got into the car.
wir stiegen selig ein.
War das erste Mal in meinem Leben, ich habe mit 18 Jahren Führerschein gemacht.
That was the first time in my life that I drove a car with a right-hand drive on the left-hand side of the road.
Und auf der linken Seite gefahren. Die haben das pausenlos gebaukt, immer wieder links fahren.
They kept on hissing, on the left, always drive on the left. Things then went marvelously. We drove about 120 miles. The only difficulty we had was in Cardiff, where we got hopelessly lost in the middle of the city.
Nach Eintritt der Helligkeit, so in der Dämmerung, ging auch unser...
Just as it was getting light, our petrol ran out, and we had to think about continuing on foot after failing to break into a filling station. We moved along a path near a farm and then in the direction of a forest, intending to hide ourselves in a clump of bushes. But we were quickly scared off by some cows.
Aufwärts in Richtung Wald und wollten uns auf einer großen Wiese mitten in einem Gebüsch verstecken.
Until then, I had not known that cows were inquisitive, but I noticed it on that occasion.
Bis dahin wussten wir noch gar nicht, dass Kühe neugierig sind. Aber
we were then discovered by the workers on the farm, who were surprised that the cows had not come down for milking. They chased us into the forest, where we hid the whole of the day.
nach unten kamen und wurden dann auf diesen Waldrand hinaufgejagt und haben uns dann während des ganzen Tages versteckt.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is the midnight news for today, Sunday, the 11th of March, and this is Alva Liddell reading it. 70 Germans escaped from a prisoner-of-war camp at Bridgend, Glamorgan, last night. So far, 23 have been recaptured. Hundreds of troops, police and civilians have been taking part in the search, and it is thought that the men may have found cover in the Welsh hills and sparsely populated valleys, or in the caves and sand dunes on the coast a few miles from the camp. Many former Home Guards living in the area have volunteered to help in the search.
We went into the drill hall or the Home Guard, and I'm not sure which it was. And when we got there, we were told that we'd have different areas to patrol, not knowing that we were going to be issued with push bikes.
On the Sunday afternoon, the wife, the baby and myself went for a walk up to Llangywydd. And as we were leaving the house in Park Street, the Home Guard sergeant rushed on to me and he said, "Ivor, get your uniform on," he said. I said, "What's the matter, Di?" "Oh, the prisoners of war have busted out." And I said to him, I couldn't care two hoots if the bloody whole German army was out. I'm going up Llangywydd for a walk. But I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. If I'll find them, I'll let you know." Which, incidentally, you could see it happen.
The chap's name was Redpath, who I relieved. I remember that very well, and he was from Stoke-on-Trent. And I said to him, "Well, you get your head down, because I'm not coming back tonight." I said, "I'm going home on the bike." We're only 10 miles from home, if that. So off we went. I cycled home, had a beautiful supper. My pal, he cycled on to a further part of Cardiff. And I stayed home. Oh, perhaps 4 o'clock in the morning.
I come along to Bayeux now, and I walking along quietly and quietly and quietly. I stopped about Bayeux, and I could hear ramblings in the wood. Well, my first reaction, I thought it was cows had got in there and one thing and another. So I stopped and I hesitated and I had a smoke, called my dog, and these old dogs started sniffing around and barking. So I thought, oh, well, it must be cows. I'll go down the farm and tell them that the cows are in the wood for them to get them out. But when I turned around Bayeux, I could hear voices again. So I turned and I started to walk back. And I walked up to the edge Bayeux, and in the field by there I could see about 10 to 12 or maybe about 15. And I watched for a couple of minutes and I gave a little shout. I said, "Oi!" And then I thought, well, now I had better get from here a bit sharp.
Now we have to come through St. Fagans coming back. And as we came up the hill to the church, there's a policeman walking towards us. He said, "Well, what are you going to do if you catch them? You know, you're not armed." Well, I said, the reason is that there's two of us. We go out in pairs. You see, the attitude was that you would apprehend the prisoner. One would keep him talking, and the other one would try and get help of some description.
So I run all the way across here back. I went in the house. My father said to me, "Where have you been then?" I told him. I said, "Is there land army boys in the Getley, Dad?" "No," he said, "not to my way of thinking. Not to my knowing," he said, anyway. And all of a sudden he said to me, "Damn," he said, "it can't be them prisoners of war, can it?" Well, now I said, that's what he said, "What are they dressed in?" I told him. He said, "You bet that's what they are," he said. He said, "Go over and tell Ben and Di over there," he said. So when I got over to Ben and Di, who was there, I said, "But Richie Howells the bankers, as we call him." And Richie said, "Well, right, I'll nip up to Kevin now to the police, and you lot go back over." Well, we came back over, the two farmers, the father and son, my father, myself, and my little nephew, and the dogs. When we got here, I showed them, well, there was nobody here. So anyway, after a bit of discussion, right by here now, we decided that we'd go through the wood. So Sergeant Ellis said, "Don't forget now," he said, "one behind the other," because he said, "You don't know whether they're armed or not." Well, we went through that wood, went through it one behind the other, about 30 of us, out down the bottom end into the plain field. When we got there, no sign of nobody. When we came to the edge of the plantation, I said to the sergeant, "Look here, Sergeant, we haven't searched that wood. We should have gone through there spread out, not single track." Well, he said, "You'll never get through there." Well, it's worth a try, innit? So anyway, we decided. Those who was able enough to come through, came through. We hadn't come about 40 to 50 yards into the wood, and there was the boys having their bit of tea, whatever they had there. And I said, to my amazement, they had a lot more than I had seen for a hell of a long time in food. They did too. They had everything. And one of them looked his head up to me Well, he must have seen me by now on the field, because he said, "You bastard."
Our forces were stretched to the limit. And of course these fellas were sitting down and enjoying the hunt.
When the darkness came, we went further in the direction of Port Talbot, and when we had reached Port Talbot, when the streets were clean, where there were no population, we marched on the street towards north. I saw the star, the Great Bear, and we marched to the north. And we came on a little river, and we took a glass of water, and then we ate our bread and margarine, and then when we had enough, we went away.
The vicar at Lalleston Church on the Sunday evening service announced to the congregation that a mass breakout had occurred of prisoners and advised the congregation to go quietly to their homes. After they departed, the church bells were rung, announcing that a breakout of prisoners had occurred. And that was the first time I heard church bells since 1939.
We were going about our chores in the farm, and we heard this awful racket, singing and whatnot. We went out, and coming down across the fields were these Free French airmen who were stationed at Stormy. They were coming down line astern, looking at each other's bottoms and boots, and singing, come out wherever you are.
Come out wherever you are. Come out from under that star. Yes, and incidentally, mentally, I'm not up to par. So come out, wherever you are.
I was following the flame of the candle down the hallway to go upstairs. I got so far as here. I looked up, and there was a prisoner of war standing on the doorstep. Well, I was terrified. He ran away. I dropped the candle, ran back into the kitchen, and I fainted. I went out like a light.
I'm standing here on the site of the old Rhondda Swansea Bay Railway. During the war, I was a signalman a little way up at Oakwood Crossing Box. One Tuesday night, about 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps, and the door opened and a German prisoner walked in. He had his hands up and he says, "Kamerad." I could see he was soaked through and hungry and had had enough. So we dried his clothes and I gave him what we had to eat, which was a few spam sandwiches. And in about 2 hours, I phoned the local police station to tell him that the prisoner was there. The local officer came down. When he arrived, he took his helmet off and also shook hands with the prisoner. I asked him, would he handcuff him? And he said, "Oh no, this poor chap has been handcuffed long enough." So cheerio, and they both went out.
The following night, my sister and I were here on our own, so we put food out for them because we were terrified. The police were here all through the day, the troops were up here all through the day, but in the night we were on our own. So we put food out for them, outside the pantry window. The following morning the food had gone, and we also put sand on the step. There were 2 big footprints on the step when we got up the following morning, so they'd been around here.
We scoured this area along with the Home Guard and a contingent of RAF. And probably by the end of the day, we had half of them in.
Wir sind dann 2 Tage und 2 Nächte.
We then wandered through the countryside for 2 days and 2 nights, and on the second day we had had enough. We found a train that had stopped on an open stretch of line, and we traveled for 2 days in a goods wagon full of mines. When we could not stand it any longer, it was so uncomfortable. The train halted and we got out.
Minen gelegen sind irgendwo auf der
We found a wood and made things a bit homely for ourselves there.
und sind in ein Waldgelände hinein, haben uns da ein bisschen häuslich gemacht und am nächsten
The next morning, we were awakened by the sound of engines. The fog lifted, the sun came out, and lo and behold, quite by coincidence, we had left the train near an airfield. We told ourselves this was our lucky day, because we had with us a pilot, Steffi Ebert, who intended to fly us home. That was our plan.
der uns mit einem Flugzeug nach Hause bringen wollte, das war unser Plan.
Bin dann aus dem Wald in
I went out of the forest and into a suburb, got into an omnibus. I had some English money, and went to this airport in Birmingham.
gefahren und bin mittels eines gefälschten Ausweises, der mich als
With the help of my forged identity card, which showed me to be a Norwegian officer, I got into the airport and looked round for a suitable aircraft. I examined the position, found the machine, and went back, beaming with joy, to explain the situation to my comrades.
zurück in unser Versteck gefahren und gelaufen und habe dann meinen
We settled down happily to sleep in preparation for the hardships of the coming morning.
selig zur Ruhe gelegt, um uns auf die Strapazen des kommenden Morgens vorzubereiten.
As soon as they were all at the station, one of them asked in good English, could he have a glass of water, as they hadn't had a drink of water since they left the camp at Bridgend. I asked him why was this, and he replied, well, we were told that all the water outside wasn't safe to drink from, it had all been poisoned.
I asked one of them why he was educated to learn to speak his perfect English, and he told me I'd been to college to learn, and also to learn to be a governor of some part of Britain after the war. Who knows, he said, it may be round here or some other part of Wales. So I told him, if you go to some parts of Wales, you will have to learn to speak Welsh because they don't speak English. Oh, he said they'll have to speak either German or English because we won't allow them to speak Welsh, he said.
They had their faces blacked, and it was thought that they were imitating the colliers going home from work.
We came on a bend of the road. I saw a thick oak and a gas lantern, and then I said to my comrade, hey, look there, it's very romantic, Kelly, isn't? Oh, yes, he said, and we went on, and the next moment there were 4 home guard men and said, hands up, and we stood and made our hands up, and it was finished. Our escapee was finished.
Wir wollten dann in der Nacht die Maschine startklar machen.
We wanted to prepare for takeoff during the night and then in the morning, as a pleasure and a surprise, to fly to Germany.
Aber es kam anders. Plötzlich knackt es im Gebüsch und vor uns standen...
But things turned out differently. Suddenly there was a cracking sound in the bushes and we saw 5 farm workers with hunting rifles. We had been spotted, and anyway, as an encouragement, the farmers had been offered a reward of £5 a head.
Wir haben dann schnell unsere Zivilanzüge abgelegt.
We quickly removed our civilian clothes, buried everything that could be used against us, and we went with these farm workers to the police jail. From there, we were taken to the camp.
It was about a week after when we heard about the last prisoner being caught. The inspector said, get the truck down, Tom, we'll go down and fetch them. Oh, on the way back to the Island Farm camp, they were in the back, of course, with the guard. Got them into the camp, into the guard room. They were stripped by the soldiers there, and they had a handkerchief with a map of South Wales right down the coast, beautifully pointed up to Ireland.
And it was thought that they were trying to get across to Ireland, but the Welsh mountains beat them.
When I was captured, they brought me to the entrance of the camp, and the way from the entrance to the camp to the camp's barrack, there stand line by line a couple of British soldiers, and they beat me up on the way from the entrance to the barrack. And I was very in hurry because I wanted to get the barrack because I don't want it to beat up. That's my story.
We were boxed in the guards room by British soldiers. They were very angry and we could understand that. And the interpreter
ask us things. When did you escape? I said, I don't know. Americans took my clock.
And then we came to the barrack, in this theater barrack, and there found we the most of our friends of the 67 officers. Some of these comrades was wounded, but we ourselves were not beaten.
At the camp, we had been disloaded, and I was pushed with my friend, all with the handcuffs, in the barrack of the guards. And then one, a little short one, took the rifle, end of the rifle, and beat out me 2 teeth here. But I don't mind, I got 2 new ones in the other camp then again, yes.
First patient I treated was an SS man who had a plaster on his foot. As he was so sullen and cold with me, as though I didn't exist, I really thought, well, I needn't really take care not to nip him, because I didn't even think he would feel it. But then I thought, well, if I were in the same position, having planned for weeks to escape and had all that misery of making a tunnel, and then when you did escape to be immediately caught, I felt perhaps I would adopt the same attitude through fear or fury or something. And I remember what my mother had said once during an air raid, sort of looking up in the direction of the aircraft. She said, oh, well, they're some poor mother's sons.
We had to tell our story, every one after the next one, and he asked me, guilty or not guilty? I said not guilty. He said, okay, 28 days. And my friend said, okay, guilty. Okay, 28 days, that's the story.
I got a kick in my after, and I stood in the middle of this theater room. Then I looked after me and I saw the piano, and I went to the piano and I played my Heinzelmännchen Schwachparade, and a piece I played when I was 10 years.
Jaco, wenn du das sagst, deinem Sohn, ich hätte das Tier raus.
Ja, ich werde mich ganz herzlich bedanken. Das Souvenir.
The son of Dr. Schallenberg did want, he should bring some little bit of that earth from the tunnel, you know?
The slime. A little boy.
A little boy. And I want to see a little bit of that earth be digged out in the tunnel.